We are in full summertime mode here on the First Coast. Nobody needs to point out that it is hot, but the hazards of extreme heat are worth talking about and guarding against. To discuss that, we welcome Dr. Sunil Joshi, Chief Medical Officer with the City of Jacksonville. Good morning, Dr.
Good
Joshi.
morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Dr. Christine Cauffield, psychologist and CEO at LSF Health Systems. Good morning, Dr. Cauffield.
Good morning.
Welcome
Great
back.
to be here. Thank you.
Dr. Joshi, you are part of the city's excessive heat task force, which has unveiled a number of programs to help beat the heat. Before we get into the specifics of that, though, how is extreme heat different from just being uncomfortably hot?
Yeah, so I mean, extreme heat is when we know is that or at those temperatures in particular with heat indexes where we're more likely to see heat-related illnesses as opposed to just being hot outside. And so that's why those numbers in particular, 108 degrees to 112 degrees or even 113 degrees with a heat index are the numbers we chose to do some of these cooling projects and cooling centers is because those are the numbers that typically are associated with heat-related illnesses, whether it's heat cramps, heat exhaustion, or even heat stroke.
And so describe for us a little bit of the physiology of what's happening when we start to get into those extreme temperatures.
Yeah, so as we get into those extreme temperatures, in particular, if you're exerting yourself outdoors, you can lose water and bodily fluids very, very quickly. And so we worry about the water being lost, but also the electrolytes being lost as well. And so when that happens, that's when we start getting these illnesses, whether it's a heat cramp or you just get like muscle aches and pains, where you do need to rehydrate at that point. And you hear a lot about that with football players and soccer players that are playing outside in the heat. Or you get to heat exhaustion, which is now that point where you're starting to teeter towards heat stroke, where you're not only tired and fatigued, you're also getting nauseated, you may be vomiting, you're losing more fluids, and you may start to get headaches and have an increased body temperature. And then finally, heat stroke, where your body temperature can get up to 104. Not only do you have the cramps and the nausea and the vomiting, you may also start to have mental health disturbances at this point as well, mental status changing, seizures, coma. That is certainly a life-threatening emergency at that point.
And this is something that's happening because the body, as it warms, is sort of sending blood to the surface to cool.
To cool, so you lose your blood pressure that way, but then not only do you lose your blood pressure that way, you're losing electrolytes. So now your blood pressure is going down, you have low blood volume, and you have electrolyte disturbances, all that can lead to the cramping, the nausea, and the mental status changes.
And that's because those organs are a little bit blood deprived at that
So
point.
they're not getting perfused with blood as much as they would normally, and as a result, they're not getting oxygen into those areas. And when that happens, our blood cells tend to die.
Right. And I want to talk about that too, because I've just been recently learning about, when you talk about temperatures that are 107 and higher, what is happening at the cellular level?
Yeah, so that's actually when we start losing our electrolytes, the cells start involuting and dying. They become atrophic. And so if they're not able to do what they need to do, you're not absorbing water, you're not sending that to the rest of the bloodstream. And as a result, your blood pressure drops. You're not getting the blood flow to your brain, your heart, your lungs, and your kidneys, which are the vital organs.
Are these accumulating impacts? For instance, like if you are exposed to heat on a daily basis or infrequently, but still consistently, for things like heart disease, for cardiovascular impacts.
And it really can be accumulating if you don't take measures in between. So as you're cooling down, you should also be hydrating. If you know that tomorrow you're going to be exposed to these high temperatures, you can be outside working, going to a sporting event, then you should be hydrating well ahead of time and getting those electrolytes into your system so that you can be better suited to deal with these issues.
Dehydration can also cause your blood to thicken.
Absolutely. So then you're at increased risk for even blood clots. And this is why folks with heart disease in particular are at increased risk of bad outcomes.
So, Dr. Cauffield, body and mind are, of course, connected, as we all know, but the impacts can be different on the
Yes.
brain and on one's mental health state. So, what do we know about the impact of heat or living in these repeated heat advisory circumstances?
Right. So individuals that live with mental health challenges are really at high risk. They tend to have a lot of sleep disturbances when the temperatures rise, which causes increased anxiety and depression. What we're finding with very high temperatures is that we have a spike in suicides. People are very agitated. They're very frustrated. They don't have the coping skills to really manage what's happening, both physiologically as well as for their mental health condition. And we also see a spike in violence. So it's very dangerous times for us, and we need to really be very mindful of taking good care of us during these extreme heat situations.
I want to ask you about the sleep disturbances. Is that something that is, for instance, if you don't have an air conditioned place to sleep, or is that something that you carry home after a day of exposure, even if you're in a cool environment to sleep?
Both, actually. Dr. Asoshi and I were talking before the show, and, if you are living with limited means and you're renting, for example, there is no law that states that a landlord has to replace your air conditioning or even offer air conditioning. So that certainly exacerbates someone that is living with mental health challenges if they're living in a rental that does not provide air conditioning. So again, sleep disturbances typically really wreak havoc on the endocrine system, really have hormonal changes, increased cortisol, which again exacerbates an already difficult situation.
And so, what are some common mental health issues that can arise during a heat wave?
Increased anxiety, increased depression, thoughts of suicide. Like I said, a spike in suicides as a result. Homicidal thoughts. People get very, very frustrated, angry. Again, don't have the coping skills perhaps to be able to manage their emotions. And so we see an increased spike in violence, rioting, for example. Um, in fact, in jails and prisons, they find an 18% increase in inmates that are become increasingly violent when there is a heat wave.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about excessive heat and its impacts on physical and mental health. You can join the conversation live on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at wjct.org, or you can reach out on social media. Um, you are talking about the intersection of, anxiety, depression, and conflict that can be created in extreme heat. And I know that you referenced, some crimes that can be that can increase, but there really has been some research to show a connection between things like murder, aggravated assault, rape, even terrorist attacks in
Exactly.
times of extreme heat.
That's right. That's correct. And so, there's so many socio physiological, environmental issues that we have to think about. It's just not that it's a hot day and we need to drink, a glass of water. It affects us mentally, physically, emotionally when these heat waves are upon us.
And Dr. Joshi, what do we know about what's happening to the brain, whether it's, in physical or chemical, that might be contributing to some of those, disruptions in behavior or
Yeah.
mood?
So it's exactly as Dr. Cauffield was mentioning, so as we start to get hot and we lose our blood pressure and we lose our electrolytes, our body is trying to compensate. And one of the ways it compensates is it releases cortisol. Cortisol is a naturally produced steroid. And so you hear all the time about when people are on steroids, they get roid rage and all this stuff. Well, our body is producing more steroids to keep our body functioning. And so, of course, at that time, that can affect our mental acuity and our mental status and our mental illness or mental health in particular. And so the hormonal changes themselves can also affect the brain and how we're thinking.
And Dr. Cauffield, if you know perhaps that you have, either a diagnosed mental illness or perhaps a tendency to some of those issues that you mentioned, like anxiety or depression, and you know that there is, this weather forecast coming, can people do to prepare or to cope?
Well, definitely stay hydrated. That's key. Stay in a cool environment. Um, Mind your sleep patterns. Make sure that you're getting enough sleep. If you're prone to having sleep disturbances, and particularly with heat issues, you may have to take additional supplements, if you will, to make sure that you're getting a good night's sleep. Also, reach out, get additional support. If you haven't been seeing a therapist, it's time to really see somebody that can help you navigate these difficult times. Perhaps you need a change in your medication. Perhaps you need to get on some medication
Oh,
if
I
you
was going to ask
haven't.
about that. I mean, if people are taking medications, should they be thinking about increasing the dosage or changing the dosage?
That might be a possibility, absolutely, because again, we want people to be stable. We want them to manage their mental health condition and not have these very devastating effects that can occur if they aren't managing it well.
So
And I guess,
they should definitely discuss that with their provider
Oh,
first, though,
yes.
because one of the issues that we get into with the heat, of course, is when you lose body fluids and you get dehydrated, the levels of the medications may start to increase a little bit too, which can in itself cause side effects that are concerning. So as we think about heat, and yeah, maybe we need to adjust medications, that needs to be done in coordination with a healthcare provider.
Most definitely.
are there other medications aside from, psychiatric or mental health related medications that change or could change depending on your exposure to sun or heat?
Well, yeah, certainly a lot of cardiac medications have very similar issues that we're talking about here with the medications for mental illness. And so there's some blood pressure medicines that you may want to adjust the dose if somebody's going to be outside for an extended period of time and maybe challenging their systems with low blood pressure to begin with. Diabetic medications, same kind of story. As we get dehydrated, our blood sugar levels may actually go up or go down depending on what activity you're doing. And again, the levels of of diabetic medications may need to be adjusted. There are medications out there that do interact with the heat and the sun in particular. So they're antifungals, certain antibiotics that if you're taking and you're exposed to the sun, it can have some effects on your skin as well. And so those are things to keep in mind too.
So, Dr. Joshi, Mayor Deegan last week announced the city's 2024 Cooling Center Plan. This is an initiative that is new with this administration. Explain to us what the Cooling Center, what's the idea, what's the animating idea behind
The
those?
big picture here is that we have folks who have to work outside. We have vulnerable populations that may be homeless or don't have air conditioning inside of their homes who are very vulnerable to the heat for all of these reasons that we mentioned. If you look at our community where we have a higher degree of homelessness, a higher degree of issues with unemployment and issues with housing, they're the same areas where we have an increased risk for heart disease and diabetes and mental illness and asthma. And so, guess what? Those are the chronic health conditions that are associated with worse outcomes with heat. And so, by opening up cooling centers for folks to go to during the hottest times of the day between 11 a.m. and 6 p.m., we allow these folks a chance to cool down, get water, and be in a cool, safe environment. And so, this year, which is different than last year's, we have city pools that are available. Remember last year, our city pools were not able to be used. We now have city pools throughout the community, 29 city pools, 16 splash pads that are also available to people who might have to be outdoors during this time that they can cool down, and 21 city libraries, 24 community centers that people can utilize as well for cooling throughout the summer, but in particular on these extreme heat days.
And so, when are those triggered? When are those activated?
So I think it's important for people to know that our cooling centers are open all the time. So throughout the summer, you can go to the library during their normal business hours and cool down and get water inside there and refill your water bottle. Same thing with all of our community centers, our city pools, which are open through the summer, and our splash pads. When we activate the cooling center plan is when we reach those extreme heat days, and the only which is when it's 108 to 112 heat index for 3 straight days, or 113 for even just one day. And the only thing that's different there is we have our JTA buses involved. So if you lack transportation to get to one of these cooling centers, you get on the bus, you let them know I need to go to a cooling center, and they will take you there for free. And so you're able to utilize our transportation system as well when we're activated with the extreme heat day.
So, humans are adaptable, Dr. Cauffield, but this impact that we're seeing, these extreme temperatures are coming with a warming planet. What do we know about how adaptable, how quickly adaptable humans can be to these kind of increases and these more severe temperatures?
I think that, for example, if you don't live with a mental health or behavioral health care challenge, you're absolutely right. People are resilient when they have these resources in the community that they can take advantage of and do some of this preventive types of activities. I think that people can move forward in a healthy way. However, vulnerable populations, those that live with mental health, behavioral health care challenges, children, for example, as well, older adults, sometimes they are not as able to participate in these preventive measures. Think of our seniors that perhaps have mobility issues that aren't able to get to the bus stop, they don't have any family members or support system to be able to help them. So we have to think about those target specialized populations that may be more vulnerable. And particularly those that live with mental health challenges, again, additional support is very much recommended as they move through these crises.
How new is our understanding of heat on mental health? Is this a fairly emerging, understanding that we have now?
I think we're having more research as a result of what's happening to our planet, but there always has been research to substantiate what we're talking about today. I think that we are now experiencing temperatures that we perhaps haven't in the past, and so it's becoming more prominent, a prominent conversation, and very grateful that we're having it today.
Dr. Joshi, and to that question of, adaptability, human adaptability, do we get the sense that just right at this juncture that climate change is moving quickly, outpacing that ability to adapt?
I mean, it's depending on where you live in the world, right? So in developing countries, third world countries, adaptation is a little bit more difficult, and it's more difficult to be resilient because the entire population is at risk and somewhat vulnerable. Here in the United States, we should be able to stay in front of this as long as we are planning appropriately, like we are here in Jacksonville with our resiliency plan and our sustainability plan and our plan to deal with these issues acutely as they happen. But you also have to be looking at down the road, where do we go? How do we keep our community safe and as cool as possible? Because the rising global temperatures aren't going anywhere. They're continuing to rise, and we have to figure out a way to keep our entire community resilient, which is what we're doing here locally. But if it was more of a global approach, it certainly would make our jobs easier.
I mean, certainly we've been looking at the extreme temperatures here in Florida, especially South Florida, just this last month have been very, very high. 107, 113 feels like. But as to your point, I mean, in Pakistan, it's reached 128 degrees,
Right.
and it just is a whole different level of threat.
That's right. And whether or not their governments take it seriously is a different issue. And of course, they have a lot of different geopolitical issues going on in different parts of the world too that make it very difficult for folks to focus on climate change and managing those vulnerable populations. We here in the United States have the resources, the ability, the intellect, and the infrastructure to make this happen.
Tree canopy is part of that. I know this administration has discussed trying to expand the tree canopy, or I guess protect what remains of it in future development. How important is that?
Critically important. So tree canopies and looking for where it's important to have the tree canopies can allow us to target funding appropriately. So there are some tools out there, the CDC, the Human Health Resources Index is out there that kind of shows us at a zip code level where we might need to have a cooler environment based on the vulnerability of the community, our build structure, and the local surface temperatures too. So tree canopies are one thing, but our pavement is another thing. We should have more pervious pavement, asphalt, colored asphalt, so that it doesn't allow our surface temperatures to be as hot. There's so many different ways that we can go about this to reduce temperatures locally at the grassroots level, but a tree canopy is a way to start for all of the good reasons that trees provide us for health reasons, but also for cooling as well.
So, Dr. Cauffield, you're talking about vulnerable populations that exist, but for people who are required to work outdoors, for instance, we know that the state can no longer mandate these, water breaks or shade because of some laws that were just passed. But for employers who have people who work outside, what should they be offering proactively to help?
I would definitely recommend that they do provide those breaks. I know that they aren't mandated to do it, like you say, due to the recent law change, but to preserve the workforce, to make sure that they're healthy, that they continue to be able to come in and do the job that employers are paying them for. You must mind their health. You must take care of employees, or they're not going to be able to work. They're going to have increased health risk, health issues, which in turn, if you're looking at return on investment, is going to impact the employer's bottom line with absenteeism, increased insurance claims, etc. So it's a win-win for everybody if we keep our workers safe.
We've got a call from Douglas in St. Augustine on this topic. Good morning, Douglas. Go ahead.
Good morning. I just wanted to comment in terms of being resilient with heat. I'm a self-employed construction worker here in Northeast Florida, and I actually have to budget extra money now because I cannot work as long and as hard during the summer months. I learned the hard way by pushing myself in the heat. I almost gave myself heat stroke a couple of years ago, and it took me several weeks to recover. And I've spoke with several other men, and we're all commenting on, my gosh, it just feels hotter than it used to. And we're really having to scale back and plan ahead our activities. And, this is having an economic impact on my bottom line, but I don't see any other way around it. And I'm one of the lucky ones who has a little surplus. So that's a big change in my life. But every summer I dread it, and I try to save as much money as I can so I can avoid the heat and stay out of it.
Good comment, Douglas. Your thoughts, Dr.
Yeah,
Joshi?
that's a great comment, and we hear that story all the time. And so one way that you might be able to overcome that is changing your work hours. And so working earlier in the morning or later in the evening, and using that middle time of the day to not be outdoors doing the construction could certainly impact your abilities to get work done, still get paid appropriately, but protect yourself from the heat. And really that's what we would typically recommend to people, along with the hydrating and using loose clothing, light-fitting clothing, that type of thing.
Is there a schedule on which somebody like Douglas can make sure that they're taking proper breaks at certain intervals?
Yeah, I mean, at least during an hour, you should take at least one break. So most of the time when you're talking about people being outside in extreme heat, we want them to hydrate every 15 minutes. And so at least if they had one 15-minute break in an hour where they can sit and hydrate, that could make a huge impact in their ability to stay hydrated, stay healthy, and not suffer the consequences of extreme heat.
And so how long of a break and how much water?
About 15-minute break once an hour, and then sipping on water throughout the day would be great, but certainly during that 15 minutes that you're out, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 8 ounces at a time, but you just have to keep those electrolytes coming.
But roughly 8 ounces an hour?
8 ounces an hour would be great if you're going to be outdoors all day working.
I want to ask about some other, interventions that people can use and how helpful those are to consider. Sometimes people carry parasols. They're starting to use very often these chilled neck wraps. I'm curious whether sunscreen helps.
I think sunscreen can certainly help in that it prevents those dangerous rays for coming in, so reduces your risk, of course, of skin cancer, but also to reduce your risk of having sunburn and, the painful effects of that. There's, yes, the neck wraps, anything that you can bring with you to make sure that you're going to be safe, you're going to be cool, you're not going to get those hormones imbalanced, you're not going to have that cortisol coming in and causing you to feel more agitated, more angry. It's all so connected on what we can do, both physiologically as well as psychologically, emotionally, to better our health, especially during this heat wave.
Dr. Joshi, talk about that as well, the sunscreen impact. Is that something that can actually deflect the impact of extreme heat, or is it just more of a skin protector?
More of a skin protector than anything. So the clothing is what protects you from the heat. As wearing big, large brimmed hats is something we didn't talk about, but that certainly can protect you from the heat as well. I do love the neck wraps. I think that those are ways to stay cool, and you could use, get them wet, and they work really well for you. You could use them multiple times, and they're not that expensive either. These are other ways for folks to stay cool. But the sunscreen is important so that we can decrease the risk of skin cancer, for sure.
And what are you hearing from our first responders, from our hospitals, about what impact that they are seeing from extreme heat?
Yeah, there's no question that JFRD gets more calls in the summer for heat-related illness, and so do our emergency rooms as well. which is also part of why we decided to put in this cooling center plan in 2023, because we were seeing this uptick in JFRD calls from about mid-May to mid-June, and that was even before it really got hot. So by having these types of programs in place, we hope to reduce those calls.
We had a comment from Kelly on Facebook. She's saying it's important to note that the cooling center plan has not been activated this year. The library downtown has been closed every Sunday. People who live on the streets get bounced for loitering when they try to cool down at other locations.
Okay, so the Sundays, the libraries are normally closed on Sundays, and so are all of our city buildings. And so on Sundays, if we need to activate the plan, which we have not had to do on Sundays so far, then the main library will be open between 11 and 6, and the Legends Center on Sutel Road will also be open between 11 and 6. But we have not reached those extreme heat days for activating those on Sundays yet.
I gotcha. And so again, the parameters for that are 113 on any given day.
That's right, or 108 to 112 for 3 consecutive days. That would then get us to utilize our heat plan, which would then open those up on Sundays and get JTA involved.
I just want to dial back to the question of what hospitals and first responders are seeing. Is that something that the city is privy to? At the area hospitals?
If we ask for it, we can get that data in terms of what are your numbers in terms of people being admitted into the emergency room for heat-related illnesses.
Yeah, and has that been something that the city's tracking?
We will start tracking that. So it's the kind of thing that the summer has just really begun, and so over time, over the 3 to 4 month period that we have these extreme temperatures, we'll see what those numbers look like compared to previous years.
We have an email from Andrew. He says, you are talking about human adaptation to extreme heat. What about non-humans? We do know that pets in particular can be vulnerable. And there's certain kind of pets and certain kind of breeds, I guess, that are more so than others with kind of these short snouts.
Yeah, I mean, pets are obvious. We need to think about our pets too. So, the time that we spend outdoors with our pets, if you're taking your dog for a walk and you're walking on the pavement, you're wearing your shoes on. Your pet is not, and that's very hot pavement. The pavement is hot. If you walked on the pavement barefoot, you would notice that pretty quickly. You have to be very careful as you're going outside with your animals this time of the year, unless you do it in the early morning or late evening hours. You might want to walk on the grass instead of on the sidewalks. Simple things like that, not leaving your pet in the car on a hot summer's day. If you're going out somewhere where you can't take your pets, leave the pets at home. You have to plan ahead, just like we do with children. You have to plan ahead with your pets as well.
So if people want more information about, the guidelines for these cooling centers, where they're located, where can they find that information?
Yeah, so our City of Jacksonville website, jacksonville.gov/StayCoolJax, which is the name of our initiative, will list all of our cooling centers, all of our splash pads, all of our city pools and libraries, and a lot of information about heat-related illnesses. And the Jax Ready website as well, which is a very good set of information for all kinds of heat-related, not just heat-related emergencies, but all kinds of emergencies here in Jacksonville. Also has great information about the symptoms to look for, how you can manage your own symptoms, and what happens to your medications when they're outside in the heat as well. A lot of good information.
That's jaxready.com?
jaxready.com.
Okay. And we did, Dr. Cauffield, touch on, the fact that people can have some severe mental health impacts, including suicide. We should mention that, if anybody is considering or knows somebody that is, at risk of suicide or suicidal thoughts, that there is a 3-digit number that they can call.
Absolutely. That number is 988-988.
And that's a 24/7
It
hotline.
certainly is.
All
Yes.
right. Well, stay cool out there. Thank you so much for coming on the program today, Dr. Cauffield, Dr. Joshi. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you
Pleasure.
for having us.
Thank you.
All right.